Criticism can be the purest form of self-actualization. I like to think of self-criticism as not just taking a jab at yourself or pointing out every wrongdoing, but as a way to also recognize your strengths and talents. After listening to this critique, listeners will know what I believe to be the strengths and weaknesses of my introduction speech. Let's dive right in. It's been a while since that first speech, so let's start off with a light recap. My introduction speech started with a quote from Dead Poets Society, which was my form of communication used to describe myself. You must strive to find your own voice because the longer you wait to begin, the less likely you are to find it at all. I went on to explain how I relate to the character Neil, who regularly felt pressured by his father to pursue a career path different from his true passion. I believe my speech leaned more towards being informative than persuasive. I was explaining to my audience different characteristics I have and how I related to Neil, since there was a time where I also felt pressured by others to pursue or be successful in some things that I had no real passion for. Not many persuasive aspects were used, but I did recognize a sense of pathos in a short part of the speech. For example, this line: while Dead Poet Society reminds me of good times, it also reminds me of times that weren't always the best. Being in classes such as CLU, dual, and honors classes, I always felt like a big part of my worth was determined by academic success. In this line, I expressed my feelings about myself, and I believe a lot of other people could have related to that too. Overall, any triad that was used was only for a line or two, and not enough to be considered a real persuasive speech. Now, let's move on to some of my strengths. First up, my attention getter. It was a quote from the movie Dead Poets Society, which I previously stated. I think this was an excellent quote to use since it was by Robin Williams. He's one of those celebrities that is still widely loved, and many know his name whether a fan or not. With Robin Williams being such a well-known celebrity, I think saying his name caught the audience's attention. Secondly, the transition sentences were well written. They clearly let the audience know I was moving on to another segment versus there being an abrupt shift in topics. Lastly, my closing. My closing was me rewording the beginning quote into my own perspective. This helped bring the speech full circle. Where there is strengths, there are also weaknesses. There are some aspects throughout my speech that I could have improved on. First is my tone of voice. Towards the end of the speech, I got more comfortable and I think it is noticeable through my voice, but it would have been better if I sounded confident and kept the same tone throughout the entire speech. I think the speech would have sounded steadier that way. Next is fidgeting. I wasn't overly nervous to give my speech, but it wasn't something I was looking forward to, so I fidgeted quite a bit. This can be distracting for the audience if done very noticeably or excessively. Lastly, this improvement involves the actual printout and preparedness of my speech. Looking back on my manuscript, the font could have been bigger, and I could have had a pen with me keeping track of my place. With this, it would have been easier to find my place after looking up to give eye contact. Aside from things I would have done better, there are also new aspects I could have added. Illustrations can be good to add for speeches as long as they make sense and add value. With my speech, there are two spots where I think illustrations could have been placed. In the beginning, where I state the name of the movie, there could have been an actual picture of the movie poster or characters. Personally, I can forget a movie name but recognize it if shown a picture. I think adding in a picture could have allowed some of the audience to realize they knew the movie I was referencing and they just forgotten the name. Later in my speech, I mentioned my friends and some memories from high school. There, I could have added in a few pictures with my friends. Overall, my introduction speech is something I'm proud of and was able to grow from, and hopefully that is reflected in my other speeches. There were good things about my speech and also rooms for improvement that I've recognized after now going through the other units. After listening to this critique, listeners know my strengths and weaknesses of my introduction speech.